Tonight, we're going to continue on with this kingdom worker, and Jesus is for all and forever. And tonight is a really important truth that I think might be the most important one all week, at least for me. I needed to hear this truth that Jesus is forever, that he doesn't give up when we mess up. Whew. Thank goodness. Amen. I'm sure that some of you have already messed up this week, maybe even today. And if you haven't, you might mess up tomorrow. Or you're definitely going to know somebody that is going to mess up, maybe your parents or your friends or your foes. And so we have to continue on after we leave camp, remembering this truth, that Jesus does not give up when we mess up. And to do that, we're going to look at the story of Peter. I'm going to tell you two stories of some mess ups, and then we're going to see what all of this has to do with us today and for the rest of our days whenever we go back. So we have to explore the story of Peter, but before we get to John 21, when Peter's having this moment, we need to kind of look back at Peter's journey because he's had some mess ups. If you remember right in the beginning when Jesus and Peter met, Peter was in the boat. He seems to always be in the boat, and he was fishing, and he wasn't doing a very good job. And so Jesus did that thing where he was like, hey, I don't know why I feel like I need to change my voice with Jesus, but you guys did. Like, hey, throw the nets on the other side. And so he was like, okay. And he did, and he caught all of these fish. This was not the story you were reading tonight. This was forever ago. And so it happened, and Jesus said, you know what? I'm going to make you a fisher of men. And Peter was probably like, I don't know what that means. That's weird, but okay. And then they become friends, and they're hanging out, and they're doing the Jesus disciple thing. And some time goes by, and we find Peter in the boat again. And Jesus tells him to step out of the boat onto the water, and Peter is like, got it. And he does that, and then he starts to doubt. And then he cannonballs, and Jesus saves him. We're like, phew. So we have this moment, and so Jesus and Peter are having like these moments in the boat, and then we get to closer to the end of the story, and Jesus is getting arrested. And at this point, Jesus and Peter are super close. And Peter, because he's afraid, I don't know if you've ever done the wrong thing because you were afraid, like maybe you didn't tell the truth or just something happened, but this is where we find Peter, and 3 times, Peter denies that he knows Jesus. 3 times he's asked, and he says, I don't know him, we're not friends, because he was so afraid that the same thing was going to happen to him. And then Peter watches Jesus die on the cross, and there's this gap in the story. There's this gap in the story until we get to John 21, and I can imagine that in that time that Peter's feeling some shame and some guilt and sadness, and he watched all of this happen to his friend, and he knows that he's messed up and that he's denied Jesus. And even though Jesus rose from the dead, Peter is still feeling this. And I think that he's having just this moment that I like to call a gap moment. Like just this moment where, I don't know if you've ever had one of these where maybe you've messed up or you're just not feeling yourself, or maybe you were really close to the Lord, but now you're not really sure where you are with him. Like this is just a gap in the story. And I want to share with you a moment when I had a gap in my story, in my faith, and it actually affected my son Jax as well. And at this point, Jax was like in pre-K kindergarten, and so he's in pre-K, and it's the day before spring break. I don't know what your pre-K did, but his had a big party before spring break, and I picked him up, and he was like really sweaty and smelly, and he got in the car, and he said, Mom, today was so awesome. All we did was play all day, and I thought, great, got my money's worth. Good. And he said, they gave us these little bean bags, and I threw mine up as high as I could. And when it hit the ground, this little pebble fell out. And the pebble was blue. And blue is my favorite color, so I stuck it in my ear. I don't know if any of you have, like, had that moment where you stuck something in your ear or up your nose, like, bless your parents' heart. And I don't know why. Like, I must have just been at the end of my rope. You know, I was working, I was a youth pastor at the time, and you know how it is right before spring break, like you have a mission trip and you're just stressing. And I don't know why, but I didn't explore or investigate. I wasn't like, oh, let's look, or tell me more about this. I don't know what happened. I don't know if I got a phone call, but a year later, don't act like you've never waited a year to do the right thing. a year later, and I know it was a year later because I was packing my bags again to take my students on a mission trip, and I got a headlamp out. Because if you're traveling with teenagers, you should travel with a headlamp, am I right? And so I get my headlamp out, and I test it, and Jax goes, that's so cool. And I go, I know, let me look in your ear. And he's like, okay. And I look in his left ear, and I'm like, man, your ear is so clean. I'm such a good mom. And then I look in his right ear, and I'm like, I see something blue. And he's like, yes, it's the pebble I put in my ear. And then he goes, oh my gosh, I was in pre-K. Now I'm in kindergarten. It's been 365 days. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So I hurried up, called my doctor. I'm like, slight emergency. This dodo kid that I don't know who made him, he stuck something in his ear. She's like, come in. And we get in, and she looks, and she's like, sure enough, there's a blue pebble in your ear. And she said, approximately, how many days has this pebble been in your ear? And he said, approximately 365 days. And she got really close to him, and she said, hey, buddy, next time you put something in your ear, I need you to tell your mom right away, okay? And he threw me under the bus. He was like, oh, I told her right away. I jumped in the car. I was like, put a pebble. It was my favorite color. Stuck it in my ear. And she just kind of looked at me, and I was like, Mom of the Year, I'll get shirts made. And she said, okay, so here's the thing. I actually can't get it out. It's too close to his eardrum. So we need you to go downstairs to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. He'll be able to get it right out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. So we're waiting in the waiting room, and the lady slides open the glass and goes, ma'am, it's been in his ear for a year. Is that right? And like everyone in the waiting room looks at me, and I'm like, again, yes, awesome. I'm getting shirts and hats, Mom of the Year. Okay, some things happen. Don't judge me. And so then we go downstairs, same thing. How long has it been in there? 365 days. Next time you put something in your ear, tell your mom, I did. Where's Mom? That's me. Oh, gosh. So I'm just like feeling like all of this guilt and shame. And the doctor's like, hey, I have some good news. We're going to be able to get the pebble out. The bad news is we have to have surgery. And I'm like, okay. And he goes, the bad news is that surgery is going to cost you $2,500. And I was like, give me the tool. Give me the tool. I'll get it out. And I was also like, hey, it's already been in there a year. Like, I think we're okay, right? So we leave, and Jax is crying, and he's really scared because he has to have surgery. And I'm starting to cry, kind of because I'm scared he has to have surgery, but also like $2,500 was a lot of money. And I'm like also feeling really guilty that I let it go for a whole year. So we get home, and I Google some ways to get pebbles out of your kid's ear. There's a lot of ways. We tried all of them, and it didn't work. And so finally, because I'm a really good Christian, after I tried all of the things, I was like, we should pray about this. We should pray. And he was like, yeah, let's pray. I just learned that like Jesus can like part the sea, and so like surely. And I'm like, absolutely. And so I call all of my friends that are like really good at praying. We all have that friend that like when they pray, you're like, he's definitely, like, that's good. He's listening to that one. Like, yes. So I called all those friends, and I'm like, please, I need a miracle. And they're like, oh, my gosh, God's got this. It's just a little pebble. I'm like, yeah, it's only been in there a year. Like, no big deal. Like, his ear must be really sticky, but we've got this. And so we prayed, and I said, do you believe? And he said, Mom, I actually believe. And I was like, me too. Like, we're going to do this. And I said, okay, just in case, I need you to sleep on your right side in case God needs some help. And God was like, thankfully, yes. And so he went to sleep, and I prayed, and my alarm went off, and I popped up, and I was like, okay, today's either surgery day or it's miracle day. You got this. All things through Christ. I was like quoting all of the scriptures, like in though I walk through the valley of the shadow, like we've got this. And I walk in his room, and I wake him up, and I'm like, hey, buddy, are you ready to see your miracle? And he's like, yes, I slept on my right side all night. I'm like, okay, roll over. And he rolled over. And you guys, that pebble was still in his ear. It didn't work. It didn't work. So have a great night. It's been so fun. No, it didn't work. I don't know if I didn't say the right prayer, or maybe I didn't call the right people, but it didn't work. And we had the surgery, and I kept it in a little specimen jar, and it's up in our dining room because, one, I want him to feel some shame when he eats dinner. But two, I told him, when you grow up and have a good job, I'm going to let you buy that back from me. It'll only cost you $3,000. And so when his friends come over, he's like, yeah, I put that in my ear, and now I owe my mom a lot of money. And we keep it because it's this reminder, because the Lord has done some other things with that story, and I get to tell this story on stage. And so I remind him that sometimes the Lord answers prayers, and it doesn't look the way we thought. But just so you know, on the way home, he began crying again. And I said, buddy, is your ear hurting? And he said, no, I feel really bad. I think that the Lord didn't move the pebble because I'm a bad kid. And I was like, no, kind of, you are a bad kid. But that's not why God, he's just, listen, I love him. I made him. He's just kind of ornery, and it's fine, and we're working on it. But that's not why God didn't show up. And I was like, absolutely not. And I pulled the car over. I was like, no, that's not why. And he said, well, why? And I was like, we'll figure it out. And I turn around, and I'm actually crying. And what I didn't say to him at that time is that I felt the same way, that I thought God didn't answer the prayer because I wasn't a good mom, because I had waited a whole year, or I didn't pay attention, or I Googled all of the things before I prayed. And I was beating myself up. And we both believed this lie that we just kind of fall into because the world works that way. You earn things in the world. You make good grades, and you get awards and scholarships, and you're good at sports, and you get trophies and rings, and I don't know, maybe a picture your parents hang up because they like money. People give you money for playing sports. What? And so this is what the world tells us. But here's what we have to remember is that we don't earn Jesus. This isn't about who deserves it. If it was about who deserved it, Jesus would have never been the one on the cross. And so that's not the way this works. Even though that's the way the world works, we have to make this divide. And we had to learn that day. We had to get to this point where we understood that Jesus still shows up for us even when we've messed up. And Peter learns this as well. And I want to show you this in John 21 when we're walking through this story, because Jesus does something really bonkers in this story, and I love it so much. At this point, I haven't been able to find a place in Scripture where Jesus and Peter have had a discussion about what happened. I don't know if you've ever done something bad and then you had to wait a while to maybe apologize to your parents or tell your side of the story, or you've been waiting a while for them to maybe hug you to remind you that they still love you. Well, Peter is in that place. He's been holding on to this shame in this gap for a while. And so as we're reading through this, get that in your headspace that he's in this place where he's just been holding this, and he hasn't been able to talk to Jesus and be like, are we good? Or can you forgive me, even though you're Jesus and that's kind of your thing? Peter hasn't had that moment, and him and the disciples are in the boat again, and they're fishing again, and they're not catching anything again. And then they show up. It's like deja vu, cue the Olivia Rodrigo song. They're, I know my audience. And then Jesus is like, hey, throw the net on the other side. And they do, and they catch all this fish. And then this moment happens, and I love this moment in this story. So I want to read this to you. This is in John 21, verse 7. So listen, this is quite a little bit, but you guys have got it. I believe in you. You've got it. I highlighted this big part. You've got it. It says, then the disciples whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. And as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and he jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the full net of fish, for they were not far from the shore, about 100 yards. And when they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. If you keep reading, Jesus was cooking them breakfast. I love Jesus. He's just just like chilling on the beach, cooking them breakfast. And what I love about this is that Jesus wasn't like, hey, Peter, sit down. We need to talk about this. I made a list. There's like 17. He wasn't. He was just like, I made you, do you like chicken minis from Chick-fil-A? I made you some breakfast. Like, let's go. And Jesus wasn't needing to like go back in time. What he was saying with that breakfast is like, hey, I'm for all forever, and like I don't give up when you mess up. Hey, like that's what he was saying with that breakfast. But my favorite part is actually like we can like we can take hope in that, but where we should be inspired is by Peter. Because Peter messed up, and then he jumps out of the boat and he bolts to Jesus. And what happens sometimes when we mess up is we feel guilty and shame, so we'll stop texting our pastor back, right? We'll stop coming to church, and we'll maybe like not make eye contact with our leaders, or we'll just feel this shame. But what Peter shows us is when you mess up, you need to remember that Jesus doesn't give up on you, but you also need to keep heading towards Jesus. Like, he needs to be your true north. Even when you've messed up, you get out of the boat and you run straight towards him. So what he's saying in this is like, we have to keep our eyes on Jesus at all times. And I kind of took this truth and I told this to my son, my older son, Aiden, when he was learning to drive, which, by the way, here pretty soon, some of you are going to get your permit, and I just need you to, like, pray for your parents. Because, like, you're going to be feeling awesome, and you're like, yes, I'm so rad. And your parents are going to be like, oh, they're not even Catholic, maybe. And they're just like, they don't know what that means, but they saw it in the movies, and they're like, this is the most terrifying moment of their life because their little baby that they made is now driving a giant bullet that could like kill other people or them. And I'm telling you, I experienced this. I have never prayed like I prayed when I buckled that seatbelt and I saw my son like turn the key, and I was like, in the name of Jesus, we are going to die. Like I was praying, like I believe, like I was saying all the prayers. And so we're driving, and he says to me, he's like, Mom, and he's like my good one. He's like, Mom, can you like not yell and like talk so much when I'm trying to drive? And I'm like, yes, I got this. And he's like, I don't think you do. And I'm like, excuse me? And you don't want to hit your kid when they're driving. So just like, excuse me? I don't hit him, guys. And he said, he's not here. He said, well, like, I just don't think that you can be quiet, it seems, ma'am. And I was like, you know what? Like, if you want me to do something, tell me that I can't do it. I was like, you know what? You see that on cue, that gas station down there? Like, I'm not going to say a word until we get to that gas station. And if I don't, then you have to buy me some snacks. But if I do, then I'll buy you. And he was like, fine. And I was like, game on, let's go. Zip it. And I was going to throw the key like in the back, but I just put it in my pocket just in case. And I'm like, okay, I'm like holding on, and he's driving, and I'm like, we're doing pretty good. And then I see the stoplight, and we all know like red means stop. And so, but it was green, and I was like, cool. And then it turned yellow, and I don't know if you know this yet, but yellow means slow down. And so I like look at his foot. I'm not saying anything. I'm like, it's cool. It's cool. And his foot is not coming off the gas. And I'm like, you're not going to say anything because he said that you're fine. And we're getting closer, and I'm like, in the name of Jesus. In the name, though I walk through the valley. And I look, and he's still, and then it turns red, and we're like almost to it. And finally, I just said, stop. And he just, like we slid that long, you guys. I was like, oh my gosh. And I look at him, and he's like, and the light, like we're under the light. There's still skid marks. This isn't far from my house. Every time I see it, I'm like, you're a good father. Like yes. And I'm like, what? Did you not see the red light? And he's like, no. And I'm like, what? How did you not see the light? And he said, well, I was doing what you told me to. And I'm like, what? And he goes, you told me to not speed. So I was looking at the speedometer, and I'm like, you... I'm a pastor. I'm going to pray for patience right here. You haven't been watching the road? He's the good one. He does what I say. The little guy's going to be like, rah. And he was like, you told me no matter what, don't speed. And I was like, okay. pull into the gas station, and I got a Snickers and a Mountain Dew, and I was just like, okay, this is here. I did say that, but what I mean is that you need to, like, no matter what, you always look ahead. Always, 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 always. You keep your eye on the road, and then you also figure out a way for the speedometer. You can do this. You play all the games. You can do this. You got this. You got it? And he was like, I think I've got it. And I'm like, you think? And he's like, I've got it. I'm like, okay, let's get back in. Oh, Jesus. Okay, I got my Dew and my Snickers. I'm fine. And I'm like, I'm going to try that non-talking thing again. And he's like, yeah, right. So we're driving, and we're doing pretty good. And I'm like, okay, we're watching the road. I should have told you that. I paid for you to go to that school, but it's no big deal. And we're driving, and he puts on his blinker like a good child, and we start getting in the other lane, and I just see this big yellow semi next to us, and I'm like, and I didn't even have to yell because the semi was like, and he's like, pulls back over. I'm like, oh my gosh, same scenario again. I'm like, did you not see the giant? I mean, it's huge. It's yellow. The Lord made it a bright color so that you would. And he was like, no, I was doing what you said. And I'm like, I have got to stop talking. And I said, what? And he said, you said no matter what, always look ahead. And I'm like, I know, he's such a rule follower. Any of you in here, firstborns, like 1 or 2 on the Enneagrams? Like, so I'm like, okay, here's the deal. And I had this like little lecture with him, and you need to remember this. This could save lives. I said, you need to figure out, you always look ahead. You look in the direction that you're going. You keep your eyes ahead. You know where you're at. You know how fast you're going, how much gas you have, if your car's overheating. But you also really have to pay attention to all of the people around you. They are very important in this scenario. And he's like, that's a lot of things. I think you should drive me home. And I was like, I think so too. We made it home. We didn't die, by the way, in case you were wondering. I did not die. I'm still here. But like, and he's only had 2 minor accidents in the 2 years he's had his license. But like a year later, we're in the car with my grandma. We call her Beanie. Beanie is hilarious. She's a terrible driver. She got a new car. She's like, I want to take you to this new car, and I want to go see my cousin. And we're leaving her cousin's neighborhood, and she lives in a gated neighborhood. Rich. And so we're leaving, and I'm sitting in the back seat. Aiden, my rule follower, front seat, Beanie right here. Beanie's driving. I see the gate of the neighborhood shutting very slowly. Just Beanie does not see the gate. And I'm like, and as she's going, it just hits the front of her car. And most people, they would just stop, but Beanie floored it. She was like, bruh, and it just ripped the whole side of the car off. And I'm in this scenario again where I'm just like, pray. I am definitely saved at this point, you guys. I've like repented. And it's just, and she just gets to the end, and then she slams on the brakes, and we're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like in the front seat at this point because she's like slammed the brakes so much. And I'm like, hey, I feel like I've been here before, but did you not see the gate? And she said, no. She's real country. She said, no, I didn't see the gate. I was looking at the road. And Aiden looks at me, and he smiles, and he says, Beanie, a wise woman once told me you got to keep your eyes on the road and all the things around you. And that is a really funny story, but there's so much truth in this when you're driving. Remember it when you're driving. But also in life, like what we have to do as Christ followers, as Christians, is our road is Jesus. And we keep our eyes on him. We also have to pay attention to where we're at. Like, are we running low on gas? Are we going too fast, too slow? Are we overheating? But a really important part of this that we've learned in this story is that we have to pay attention to all of the people around us. Because if we don't, we could hurt ourselves or we could hurt them. And we learn this truth walking through John 21 and looking at this with Peter, because what we learn is if Jesus isn't giving up on people when they mess up, that we shouldn't either. And we have to become a people that we believe this truth, that Jesus does not give up on me when I mess up, but that also means that he doesn't give up on our enemies or our friends, and we shouldn't give up on them either. And we have to pay attention, and we have to keep our eyes on him, just like Peter did. He was constantly running towards him. You are going to mess up, but don't beat yourself up. And the people around you, they are going to mess up, but don't beat them up for this, because Jesus doesn't give up on them or you when we mess up. And that is the incredible truth today, that he is for all and forever. and that he is not giving up. And if he's not giving up, then we are not going to give up. Amen? Like, we can keep doing this. So friends, keep your eyes on Jesus. Pay attention to where you're at, but also pay attention to all of the people around you. Because those people are living in a world that gives up on them when they mess up. But that is not who we are. Jesus is for all. He is forever.